Like I said, Heather has she worked in the corporate world for a long time. She worked for like 3 decades working with large management consulting firms as a leader of teams there. And she really has shifted her focus to working with moms in the workplace and leaders to say one of these untapped resources, as people are struggling to find talent, struggling to find good talent, is working moms. And so many working moms have to feel like they have to leave the workplace, because it doesn't really support what they need to do with their kids. So she's really kind of switched into focusing, how do we really help, not just working moms, but what she shares with people, and even the information in her book is are tactics that can help anyone in the workplace who are thinking about, I need some sort of way to integrate my life with my work. And so she really focuses on moms, but really her learnings and her tips and her research can help pretty much anybody in the working world. So
Yeah.
and she lives in DC, so she's joining us live from our nation's capital today. Um, and yeah, sorry, I didn't read everything, Heather. Is there anything
No, it's
that I
fine.
missed?
Goodness. No. I feel like we're the other Washington today because it's been pouring for about 24 hours.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not typical for us, but
Yeah. So thank you for coming. And it's just such an important thing. And I have your book right here.
thank you.
And Heather has the best name. Her maiden name is Lane and her last name is Powers. So her book is called The Power Lane, which is both of her last names, which is awesome.
No control over that, but I'll take advantage of it.
Exactly. Yeah. So thanks for coming, Heather.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's excited.
Yeah. Janet's back.
Jan.
So yeah, what can are you, do you want to show your slides? Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, happy to share the slides if that works.
Okay,
Just need you
perfect.
to.
There you go. And I'm not drinking wine. I'm drinking kombucha, but I always drink it out of a wine glass because it feels fancier. I just realized right now I'm like this, that doesn't look awesome. I promise it's kombucha.
We trust you. Great. So we put a few slides together, really hoping this can be a conversation as we go through this. And please, if there are any questions or comments throughout, would love to, again, have this be a conversation. So, Carrie, you talked about recording. Is it on?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
going.
All right. Just want to make sure. All right. So yeah, motherhood at work. Um, So we thought we'd talk a little bit about why should we even talk about motherhood at work? Some of those unrealistic expectations or double standards that are out there still. Why we need to create and nurture workplace villages and what that is as a concept. And then some strategies to help the moms in your life. And to Kara's point, these can apply to everybody. Uh, so interesting as I was, again, working on the book and then doing some coaching and speaking as well. 70% of today's employees are caregivers. So whether they're parents or caring for their parents or caregiving in another role, a lot of what, again, is specific to moms is really helpful to all caregivers, frankly, all employees. So hopefully there's some tips in here for everyone to take away. So did I get ahead? No, here we go. All right. So why talk about motherhood at work? Well, May is a sort of natural time with Mother's Day, which is a common holiday. But we also have Mental Health Month and we have Maternal Health Week. And so, with those sort of opportunities to pause and really reflect on how are we supporting moms? How are we supporting everyone's mental health? How are we supporting maternal health? Are there things that we can be doing differently or reach people better? So we thought this was a good time to combine both of our interests and dive into this topic. In addition, one of the reasons, remember years ago when Kara and I met and I was first starting to think about a book, I was like, well, it's kind of an unprecedented time. When I started in the workplace, or at least professionally after college, decades ago, you got the job you had and you held on to it because there were a lot of people who were looking for a job. And that's flipped now, right? There are a lot more jobs out there than people available, despite some of the recent activity around layoffs and such. But we still have a talent shortage, and that doesn't seem, it's not going away anytime soon. So the real question for me and what got set me down this path, if you will, was that moms have the skills that most industries need. And they're pursuing education, they're getting the experience, their skills even developed and honed as moms. We'll talk a little bit more about things like time management, negotiation, budget, things like that are skills that are directly transferable from their home front into the workplace. And so it seems to be a good match, but we still have some challenges in helping leaders who are looking for great talent think about moms as that cohort that they could pull from. And then we'll talk a little bit about moms and really all women, whether they have kids or not. They face different challenges at work than the men in the workplace. And those are everything from, again, biases as to, oh gosh, she has kids at home, she can't work late, or um, she won't be able to take that challenging role on because, again, commitments or obligations at home. And unfortunately, that does convey to women whether they have kids or not. And so those are some of the challenges that, again, we're still dealing with 3 decades after I started in the workplace and thought we'd be done with, but we're still here. So we talk about what are these unrealistic expectation or double standards. It's still the case. I was just talking with some moms with younger kids last week, where the dads can be applauded for coaching the t-ball game or coaching the t-ball team, and yet moms get eye rolls for stepping out, periodically to run the kid to the orthodontist or, attend something at school. And so those are just some obvious examples of what those double standards are. But the motherhood penalty is actually a pretty real thing, and it's been studied by many. Some of the activity or some of the research that I really love and go back to frequently is Claudia Golden. She's the 23 Nobel economist, rather, uh, award-winning, and she's done a lot of great research around women in the workplace and even gone specific to moms, but it's tangible, right? So for every child a mom has, on average, she sees a 4 to 6% reduction in her compensation. And that adds up over time, right? The current estimates are between 400 and $500,000 over a lifetime of earnings. That's significant. And that is, you can attribute that to maybe being out for maternity leave or longer stays at home. But it's actually real, even for moms who take the minimum for leave and come back. So the motherhood penalty is a real thing, and we're doing what we can to highlight it and address it, but we have a ways to go. On the flip side, we have the fatherhood bonus, right? And so that is for every kid a dad has, he sees an average increase of 10% in his compensation. That is astronomical. And of course, it contributes to the difference between moms and dads, or even more generally between men and women. But again, that's something that has been studied, is real, and we don't see that going away. So the more we can talk about it, the more we can highlight it. Um, People in those positions can be really thinking about how do we address those things?
Hey, Heather, can I ask a question?
Please.
Do they know the motherhood penalty? I kind of understand, if a mom is out for several months or takes a couple years off,
Yeah.
I can get how that could happen. What do they attribute the extra pay increase to men who have kids to?
Yeah. So several things come out, but it comes down to the um, impression or belief that the father is the provider of the family, and therefore he should, he now has a family to care for or a growing family to care for. And it's shocking in some of my research that we still have leaders who look at their team and fathers get the bonus or, get an increase or get a promotion. And some of it's directly related to or, so closely tied to the birth of a child that it can't can't really be separated. And yet a mom on their team or a single mom on the team doesn't get the same. And the rationale, that literally the verbatim reasoning that leaders give is because, well, he's a father, he's taking care of his family. Well, so are moms, right? We have an increasing number of women who are the primary breadwinner or the sole breadwinner if they are, if their parent partner stays at home or if they're a single parent. So really being able and equipped to challenge that in a workplace is important.
Yeah. I'm guessing some of it is overt, but I'm guessing a lot of it is also just kind of that unconscious bias towards like, we got to help the man take care of his family.
Exactly. Yeah,
Interesting.
and I've seen more studies, outside the US, but where there are pay transparency and even sort of blind reviews, blind assessments and blind compensation adjustments, those are addressed differently, right? So we don't see it come play in to those decisions as much. So there's really something to that. If we were to look at a female and a male's performance and look at it strictly on sort of the metrics, what did they accomplish and what was the impact to the business, taking off the names on the top of those evaluation sheets is pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I know there's when I worked at Best Buy, which was a really long time ago, but I know discrepancies still exist. But I remember going through an exercise where we had to do the same thing is really look at, the same level of position. And there were places where there were women making, this is 15 years ago, $30,000 less in the
Yeah.
exact same position as their male counterparts sometimes. And I do remember Best Buy did a good job of writing that. And so, we had dozens of women who got really big pay increases at the time, to at least make it closer, but it sounds like it's still a problem.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think many organizations are trying. I had similar personal experience of in a couple different scenarios being told, well, you're part of a dual income family. That's my choice, right? That shouldn't impact my compensation. I should be compensated for the work I'm doing and the impact, again, I'm having on the business. Another time, similarly, was working with a man, and he had a little bit less experience than me, but um, he made more, and that was because his family was bigger. And I'm
Awesome.
like, again, that's his choice. It's his choice for his wife to, or their choice for his wife to stay home with the family. But that shouldn't impact our compensation. We have equal impact on the business. We should be paid fairly equally. And again, that was in the last 10 years or so. So it's still out there,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah. So the next one is promotion discussion or considerations. And this one, so when I think about this, it's, obviously the promotions, but I go back to the sort of the impact to the pipeline. So right now, the average number of people promoted. So think about for every 100 men promoted, right now, 87 women get the same promotion. And so if we think about when men and women enter the workforce, at least in the knowledge industry, the sort of professional services where my background is, largely came in equal numbers. In some years, it was even more women, but generally came in roughly equal numbers. And then that first promotion into leadership, into a supervisory role, if we look for 100 men get promoted and only 87 women, well, it's not hard. No, it doesn't matter how many levels are in your organization, not hard to understand why when you get to the C-suite, it's only about 25% female because at every level, there are fewer women promoted. And then you factor in things like assumptions around, oh, she's going to have a child. Oh, she has a family. Maybe she doesn't want that assignment or can't handle that assignment. Those also factor into sort of the next level promotions. So again, just making that, bringing that out into light and having that as a actual conversation is really important. The other thing that keeps coming back to the promotion is how women, again, regardless mamas or not, women are often promoted on what they've actually achieved, whereas men are promoted more on potential.
Mhm.
And so that difference in and of itself changes the dynamic and how you're talking about the candidates for that next level. I hear stop. No, I can keep talking, but any reactions to that?
Yeah, it's surprising, but not surprising at the same time, I would say.
Right.
I can see it.
Yeah, I would have to say the same thing because it's happened in
Yeah, definitely a sidebar there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. We're cheering for you.
Yes, yes. Well, and that ties into the pay equity, right? Again, it's the um, being paid fairly, regardless of gender, but for the impact you have on the business. And I know in some of the organizations I worked in, they would, bands that we talked about, sort of bands or ranges. Those are helpful to have at least some insight as to, where do you fall in that band. But the more you can be transparent about it, I just think it's better for all. I know many don't like that, don't like sharing the salaries because then they have to at least have a conversation, if not adjust when there are big discrepancies. But it's important for people to know that they're paid fairly, or if they're not, that there are recourses to adjust that.
Yeah. Heather, I have a couple other questions. Am I derailing us too
No,
much?
no, please.
So Minnesota just passed a pay transparency law, and I don't know a lot about it because I don't work in that area of human resources. I never have, but even less so now, have less visibility to those sorts of things. But it has to do with sharing ranges for different
Mhm.
positions and that sort of thing. Are there, I know I live in a very liberal state, a very blue state. Are there, have we seen that in other states happening? How common is that? Does it seem to go on political lines, people, states that are more liberal versus more conservative? Have you noticed any of that?
Great questions. And I did hear about Minnesota. It's not universal. It is not across all 50 states and the six territories. I sit, as Kara said, I sit in Washington, D.C. We are, probably no surprise, also fairly liberal around several things. We also have, I believe we have pay transparency. But I've not looked at it from a political line. I want to say roughly 20 or so states have something like that.
Okay.
Fairly new. The UK is the country I've followed more closely. And when they introduced it, obviously there was a lot of pushback from some organizations, but they're finding it to be very helpful to have the data out there and to be able to support inquiries, but also understand, across industries, how are we supporting and compensating people. So I think we have a long ways to go, but we're learning from states like Minnesota and from other countries.
Okay. And then my second question, I don't know if your research goes into any of this, and this may get us way too far off track. So it's okay for you to say, carry your, no, we're not covering that or talking about it. So I was shocked when I moved from, I worked at this small family owned business in a huge, giant corporate office. Um, I was shocked to kind of see the way men support men in promotions, pay, that sort of thing, and the way that women don't support women. Women are more competitive with each other, where I would see men interview, and I had line of sight to a lot of interviews and pay offers where they would kind of feed their male counterparts, and they would go for, I know this, the range is this, Kara, but I really want to offer this amount, which is the high end of the range. And women with hiring other women would very often offer at the very low end of the range.
Mm.
And so and I know Anita Paniker, who Heather and I both know, did her doctorate on Mean Girls in the workplace. and just how women don't support women. I really asked her if I could read her doctorate. She's like, no, because I'm going to turn it into, she's going to market it, right? So
Good.
she's like, no, I can't share that with you yet, Kara, but I'm so curious to see what the research said on that. And I'm curious if any of your research went into that phenomenon or if you've seen that.
Yeah, so I have seen it. I didn't spend a ton of time researching that. I will say, and this is more anecdotal and from my experience, but 30 years ago, yes, definitely saw that. And even, 15, 20 years ago, saw more of that competitive nature between women. And then, and again, this is very, it's just personal experience, and I know it varies by organization and even geography. But in my organization, once we got to senior levels, we realized again, you look around the room, you're like, oh, like only 20% of us are women, right? Like, and this is a problem. So how do we support one another? And so it became almost we have to band together or we're never going to
Uh,
break through this barrier that we have. And a lot of it was the behavior you've described of men supporting men and supporting, oh well, he's got a family to support and this, that, whatever. You're like, that doesn't matter. Again, it's based on the impact you have at work. Excuse me. So by banding together, we could actually support one another. Even if we didn't work together, we were at a level where we could support one another the ways we could. So we weren't competing per se, but we were reinforcing one another's points in meetings. We were supporting one another's promotion candidates.
Yeah,
so
it's
interesting. When I first got my job, I got an offer. I negotiated for a little bit more, maybe $4,000 or $5,000 more. And day two of my job, I worked in HR. I got this big binder and to help with my onboarding. And in the second section was all about pay and compensation, and it had all the pay ranges. And my first offer that she gave me was $1,000 below the
oh
minimum
my,
pay. And I didn't know because I was coming from Des Moines. And so I didn't have I didn't know really cost of living in Minneapolis, what that was like. I wasn't really sure how to negotiate. But she literally offered me $1,000 below the minimum pay. And I didn't have a lot of experience at the time. I had 5 years of experience in HR. I had two master's degrees. Um, but I just couldn't believe it. And I was proud of myself when performance review time came around. I called her on it. It was, 6 months later, and not called her on it in like I hate you, but I just said, hey, I don't understand. Like when I came in, I had more experience than some other people. I have the educational background. You offered me less than the minimum of what this
yeah,
pays. Help me understand why you did that. And it explained to her, this is going to put me behind in my whole career at this organization because increases are a percentage of whatever you earn. And so this is going to set me behind every single year. And she listened and she was great and apologized and um,
mm,
gave me my increase and a bump up from it. But I had to ask. And had I not worked in HR, had I just, been working in marketing or something else where I didn't have access to the pay ranges, I wouldn't have known that. And it just really surprised me. It just really surprised me. And my boss was a female, and I was like, come on, man, like should we be helping each other out?
yeah,
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and kudos to you for doing that. I get so excited about it, I get choked up. But no, and I think we have to have more of those discussions, and that's why I love sort of the pay transparency because without it, we don't know exactly what's happening.
right. Yeah.
Um, so I do think, I still hear of women who are like, well, I had to navigate through that. I had to fight for that. I had to, figure out childcare and all that stuff. But I think more and more we're realizing the benefit of banding together and helping one another because we're never going to make it if we're solo, pushing these initiatives forward.
Yeah. Okay, I keep derailing you. I'm sorry. I know you
No,
get to like things people can do as well. So
yeah, no, this is great because I think it to me, it helps reinforce the points and adds a little color. It's not just me talking. So we can talk a little bit more just about some of the unconscious biases or self-imposed expectations. I think we've hit upon a little bit of women often set expectations, and certainly moms, of what they need to do or how they need to behave. Um, and so that can be a derailer. I mean, it certainly isn't always helpful. Um, but these unconscious biases, Kara and I were talking the other day about things like, okay, who's going to lead up the DEI committee, or who's going to organize the office celebration or run the fun committee? Oftentimes it's defaulted to the female on the team, or at least one of the women on the team. Sometimes we like to do that, but not always. And certainly if it's not part of the annual review or considered in these compensation adjustments. So that's something I can remember several instances of challenging people who are like, oh, Heather will do that, or Katie will lead that. And like, what about Sean? Or what about Terry? Why can't they lead those? They're as capable. They just are male.
I have
So,
I have a good one for you there that you probably haven't heard. I worked at a family-owned business that they were a produce company, and one of my jobs was every now and then they would decide to make these giant vats of like homemade guacamole from they would just go down and get all the ingredients. And so I was the one who was chosen to make guacamole for the whole staff. No, it
Was
was
that
great.
Capital City Fruit?
At Capital City Fruit, yeah. It was great because I learned how to make excellent guacamole. My friend Chico, he ran the dock. He's like, "You learn how to make guacamole from a real Mexican, Kara." So it was great in that respects. But it was, now that I look back, it is interesting that let's pick the girl on the leadership team. I was the only female on the whole leadership team there. She must be the best at making guacamole. So
yeah.
anyway, sorry.
No, it
Apologize
is.
for interrupting, then I keep interrupting.
No, you make me think of an example. Um, Worked at a large, it's like 30,000 person management consulting firm. And within our group, there were about 30 of us at the director level, and 6 were women, right? So it was a small group. And they would often look to us to plan the offsites. And finally, we just said, well, great, we're going to make the most of it. There'll be no more golf in the offsite, right? We're going to have spa days. There will be wine tasting and food versus what you like to do. And so we just took advantage of it. You're
That's
going to
awesome.
have us plan it. We're going to do the stuff we want to do, not the stuff you want to do. So try to make the most of it. All right. So this idea of workplace village, and you've all heard the phrase of it takes a village, to raise a child. It takes a village to do a lot of things. So really finding some of the recent headlines to be frankly shocking and a problem. Even last week, everybody's replaceable, or work-life balance is your problem. It not only sends a message to the current employees of how they feel about their talent and how they're going to be supported, but it certainly creates problems for attracting new employees to the organization. And it really sends a tone for, again, how they're treating their talent and viewing it as very transactional. I think we all have heard of studies and have even seen it prove out in our own organizations. The people who feel supported are going to go the extra mile, right? They're going to be more loyal. It just bodes well if you feel like the people you work for care, even in some small degree, for who you are as a person. In the sort of research around creating a sort of loyal, productive, great organization, one of the studies that I love to reference is out of the Federal Reserve, and I believe it was St. Louis, where they studied upwards of like 10,000 professional employees to say, like, who are the most productive? Sort of all things being equal, who are the most productive? No surprise, moms came out as some of the most productive, but it was also dads. And so basically parents with 2 or more kids were found in this particular study to be the most productive because they both went through some changes in their brain to just prioritize things in a way that allowed them to do their quote work and to care for their kids at home. And so with that, it was one of the first studies I found where it was both moms and dads um, are productive employees. So with that in mind, and again, 70% of people as caregivers, don't we want more parents as part of our team?
That's interesting that they saw changes in their brain structure. That neuroplasticity is
Yeah.
super fascinating when you start reading about it and how you can change how the brain structure changes just due to the activities that you're doing.
It is. I found that pretty fascinating. And it wasn't just one kid. Like you can figure out one kid. It was two or more. Okay, that's good. So really starting to think about empathy as a competitive advantage in an organization, and being able to support your team, to support your employees, because the ROI is huge, right? The ROI comes back exponentially. I've probably also seen studies of, what are employees looking for in their organization. And compensation is always important, certainly usually in the top five, but it's rarely the first, right? It's often the flexibility or feeling supported or feeling like there's professional growth opportunities. Um, and so it's it's not like those all have to be expensive things to do to support your employees. But we don't always think like that. And so again, having conversations like this to really challenge the current thinking is important. And then again, sort of the transactional nature of the top bullet there with some of the crazy headlines we're seeing. You're never going to build momentum. You're never going to sort of get in a good place, whether it's, you're looking for productivity or just innovation or whatever you're looking for in your organization. If you have the right support for your team, you even can possibly create a fun environment where people want to come to work and have fun. That builds momentum. And I think that's what a lot of organizations are looking for. A lot of the organizations that are lauded, Patagonia is often highlighted, New Balance, um, Whirlpool. I'm thinking of some of the companies that are figuring this out or have figured it out and recognize if your employees are supported and feel like they um, are contributing and are part of a good group to work with, they're loyal, they're productive, and you build momentum as an organization. So would love reaction to thoughts on whether the sort of creating this workplace village or some of these ideas around empathy and, building momentum.
Yeah, it all makes a lot of sense. It's very fascinating. Um, I my husband and I have a software company,
Mm,
about 25 employees, and we all work remotely. So definitely you have to get creative on how to support one another, and then also the fun factor and um,
yeah,
things like, online games together, but then also have in person as much as we can. And
yeah,
that's the thing, because that makes a huge difference.
yeah. And were you always remote or was that a change with COVID?
That was a change. We started out in an office and had grown the business quite a bit, and then had to downsize
Yeah,
during COVID. And at that time, we thought we would go back to an office, but we remained remote. So
good.
with no plans to return to an office at this point. Who knows, in
Yeah,
the future, but
yeah,
right now it's working well, and we find enough times to get together face to face that seems like people are satisfied that way.
yeah. I think that's a great point of you you do what works for you and for your team.
Mm.
And, certainly I've seen here in DC, whether it's the federal government itself or supporting organizations, federal contractors or and such, uh, these return to office mandates that are sort of blanket across an organization rarely work,
Mhm.
especially if people have shown over the last 5 years that they're equally, if not more productive, remotely. But there is that in-person, that real life element that's important. And so it sounds like you've designed a way that sort of strikes that balance. What I see here in DC is there's no conversation. There's no like, okay, we're gonna have team meetings Tuesdays and Thursdays, so let's all try to be in the office, between 9 and 3 on those days. Whereas other days, come in if you want, but if it's better or more productive for you to be at home, that's great. The organizations that are having those conversations seem to be doing much better, and certainly the retention is better for their teams. But
Mhm.
the blanket, we all have to be doing this or that, rarely works.
Yeah. Everybody likes choice. So
Right, right.
And
yeah, it's been interesting kind of reflecting from when we did go remote. I think I shared this with Kara a little bit, but how everybody, we just kept very close contact with everybody. What do you need at home to be successful and all that sort of thing. But a lot of the questions at that time is when are we going back to the office? Well, we don't know what's happening in the world, let alone
Right.
going back to an office. So that was the conversation early on, and we didn't know. So that's kind of the answer. We don't know. I know that's
Yeah,
hard, but we don't know. And then, but as time went on, we were still getting some of the questions, and I realized that something had flipped, that people were worried that we were going to mandate office time again.
yeah,
Through further conversations, I thought, why are people still asking? They seem like they're doing well at home, but they're still asking the question. And that's kind of, once we drilled down a little bit, that was what most people were wondering, are we going to have to go back to the office?
yeah.
Because now
that's
I kind of have a good situation at home. I'm able to have lunch with my family or
Right.
pick up the kids after school, very flexible. And so there was that
Yeah.
fear on the other side. So it was kind of interesting at reflecting on it.
yeah. I bet that was interesting to watch that question morph into like,
Yeah. So it's like we're still getting the question. I don't understand what's going on here, but yeah,
Yeah,
through a lot of
yeah.
conversations and
huh.
digging into it, that's kind of what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was telling someone the other day, my sister and her husband have been remote since '05 or '06. One for the same organization and the other for different, but that's just been the nature of their work, and that's worked fine. And then again down here in DC, we've it's been a huge shift because it seems to be the either or, right? Everyone in this agency has to come back. That means all the supporting contractors have to come back as well. And just the basics of you don't have desks for everybody, right? Parking, just getting the logistics of getting someone in the office have not been thought through, let alone can they?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, big shift.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, Heather, we have about 15 minutes left, and I for sure want to get to some strategy. Oh, look at you.
I thought we'd move right along.
Yeah, there you
We're thinking this the same way.
Uh,
Yeah, so a couple strategies, and I know there are several more, but these are some of the ones that uh, kept coming up in my research, and certainly a couple of these you'll see in the book. Communication, I harp is probably the wrong word, but I feel like I harp on this a lot because I think it's so important. And it goes both ways, right? It's again getting back to the leader expressing like why he or she is asking for something, whether it's being in the office or sort of expectations around work, being clear as to the why. Because to your point, Anne, people need to know why there's a request, and oftentimes that's what they're missing, and then they can get on board with whatever the ask is. Similarly, from a mom's perspective, and again, this can help everybody. When you're making a request of your leadership of your organization, being clear in what that is and how that supports the business. So, asking for some flexibility on arrival time or flexibility in your core work hours. Um, Oftentimes, it can be accommodated, but sharing it in a way of I'm still going to get my work done. If I have to leave a little early on a day or these certain days, I'll make sure to make sure, that the work gets done later in the evening. However, a follow up, but making sure you're presenting the ask in a way that ties to the business. Vice, again, I want to get a promotion or I want a raise without any sort of context. This is the impact I've had, and here's how I'm helping the business. So I think communication, we have a long way to go in both how we're sharing expectations and requests and how we're framing them in a way that is still keeping business needs in mind. Leadership training, also something I spend a lot of time talking about. This was a struggle in decades in my career. People get appointed to a leadership role, often because of their technical or individual expertise, and rarely get anything more than here's how you approve time or here's how you approve expenses. When in reality, and to me, this was highlighted exponentially in COVID, the requests of the team coming to the leader to help them sort through childcare situations or commuting obligations or whatever they're dealing with personally, the leader's often ill-equipped to handle those. And so a good leader will sort of default to a handbook or a training guide if it's not spelled out. And again, most of the scenarios are not spelled out in exact format as to what they're experiencing. Then they're on their own, or they just default to no because they don't want to get in trouble with their own supervisors. And so the more we can help leaders both think through some of the scenarios that they might experience, but also recognize that they're not alone either. Most leaders have leaders of their own that they can go to, bounce ideas off. Again, there are resources available that they don't often think about. So that's a big area of opportunity for leadership training. We've talked a lot about different workplace flexibilities. That can be everything from where they're working to the hours they're working, flexibility in how they engage. Uh, Again, just having that as an option and thinking through, okay, what's going to work for us as a business or as an organization. Maybe it's core working hours. Maybe we have to be together certain days of the week or certain times of the month. But as leaders, being able to define what that is, communicate with the team, and then if there have to be some flexibilities for particular team members, sort of understanding the impact on them and then those around them. And then we've also hit upon some of these assumptions and biases, but um, really pausing to say, am I not offering this opportunity to that mom or to that woman because I'm assuming something about her situation at home? Or am I assuming someone's going to pick up that new role or that, planning the offsite or whatever it is? Making sure that we're all human. We all have some biases and sort of understanding our own, but also checking the team's assumptions and biases before making decisions. But let me pause there and see if any reactions to some of these strategies.
I kind of go back to, I know Heather, you and I have talked about this, is that flexibilities, those workplace flexibilities is really a leader's fear, I think, around ease of managing performance.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really know how to manage performance very well or set clear expectations. And so it just feels easier when somebody's in the office, as opposed to being really clear. I think that's one of the best things leaders can do to support anyone, moms especially, but anyone, is to be really clear, get really good at managing performance from here's the expectations, here's how we check in on those expectations, and here's how we address it when you're not meeting expectations.
Yeah.
Because if leaders can get really comfortable with that, then they can allow someone to be more flexible with where they work or even how they get work done, when they get work done, if they're confident that the work is actually going to get done.
That's a great point. It's easier, quote, to manage what you can see.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, they like to have them around, and it's
right.
harder to actually do the work to plan out what do we have to do as a team and what are the individual team members' roles and how does that all come together and how do I check in on the work?
Yes. So, and maybe that falls under that leader training, is getting really good at training your leaders on how to effectively manage performance.
Yeah.
When I worked at Apple, they didn't like the word performance management because it sounded too like rough, like being like, I'm going to manage your performance. So they called it fostering excellence. How are we going to foster excellence on our team? So, but that to me is the foundation of how do you enable all these other things, is teaching your
Right.
leaders to get really good at even just setting clear expectations and having tough conversations with people when they're not meeting expectations.
Yeah.
And then you can allow all these other things.
That's a great point. Yeah. And I think having the ability to trust that everyone is trying to do a good job and knowing some people might need more frequent check-ins, right? And some are fine.
Right?
Sort of give an assignment and you'll get it back whenever the agreed upon due date is. But some are going to need more frequent check-ins and sort of having the ability to know who you need to check in more frequently with and also trust that things change. And so that's a skill that comes with practice. Um, but we're not even having those discussions with our leaders, right? It's just sort of, okay, go off and conquer. And you're like, now what do I do?
Uh, And leaders even get nervous when you say something like that, right? Someone is going to need more frequent check-ins, but you can set it up. I always coached my leaders, still do with people I consult with, to say, have the person who's asking for the flexibility set up the check-in. So say to them, hey, I need you every Monday at 4 p.m. to check in with me on A, B, and C. And I expect an email in my inbox by Monday at 4 p.m. That way, the leader doesn't have to put it on their to-do list to go check up with the person, but
Right,
set this process so that person updates you and kind of checks in themselves. And then depending on if they do it or not, then you go from there. But
right.
um,
That's a great example of yeah, how to share that requirement to check in and not have it all be, one more thing on the leader's plate.
right. And how do you take that? I always try to think about what are people's arguments going to be against things.
Yeah,
I talk on employee well-being all the time. And so I think about what are people arguing about from a cost perspective, ease perspective, that sort of thing. And how do you take that fear or worry off their plate? Because there are ways you can set things up to counteract most of those things. So the leader doesn't feel like, oh my God, this is one more thing I have to do, because they're busy too. And they're
yes.
held accountable to really high expectations. And so you don't want to add things to the leader's plate to accommodate this other stuff. How do you make it super easy and within the flow of the work they're already doing?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's great.
so much work to do.
There is. But I love having these types of conversations because regardless of what industries we're in and geographies we're in, right? It's rewarding that we're not alone. Maybe a little disheartening that we're still dealing with some of these things, but we can share ideas and tips and tricks to work through them. Yeah. Any questions or reactions from any of you?
Does your book talk about how to have some of these conversations with your boss? Because you were talking about the work from home. Can I work from home if my kids have activities that I don't look like I'm not doing my job? Because I think that's how it's perceived by others. But maybe
Yeah.
your book talks about that, having those
So,
difficult conversations.
yeah, it touches upon it and probably not in the detail totally needed. Um, but I think, immediate advice or recommendation would be to present it in a way that, again, talks about how you're going to get your work done for the day or for the week with the ability to work from home, whatever you're requesting, and demonstrating that. Like, I know it always worked well for me to sort of build up to the ask. I'm like, okay, I'd like to work from home a couple days a week. All right, I'm going to demonstrate like this day I'm working from home. I'm knocking it out of the park. Like I know, to Kara's point of at the end of the day, of here's everything I've done and here's sort of next steps, making it very clear that you have You've outlined what you're going to do for the day and that you actually do it. Um, and so being very crisp on, this is the request, here's what I'm going to get done, and here's how I'll get it done.
Hmm.
Without going to the weeds, I hate giving them every little detail just
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
things come up. But there also has to be that trust factor of, I'm a proven employee and I can get my
yeah.
work done. I just need a little flexibility to get it done in a different location today.
Hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's tough. That mom guilt will get you every time.
Yeah.
That is good.
Um, yeah, and I think, not to throw more on your plate, but two thoughts. One, Kara, I love how you frame stuff as, you're going with your request, so you'll also take on the ownership of setting up those meetings or sort of offering when and how you'll check in, whether it's an email daily or weekly, depending on the check-in. That's great because again, it shows you're trying to work with a leader and you're trying to offer a way to um, make this as easy on him to say yes as no. But then also this policy that he was supposed to write last year. If you went in with a draft that said this would work for me and others here in our organization, um, maybe that would be helpful. Again, not to add to your plate, but
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
get something in place. So I know we're bumping up against time. I'll just offer this. This is the book that Kara flashed. Thank you so much, Kara. It's it's been a labor of love. If anyone's interested, there it is. And I can certainly stop sharing.
Yeah, and I can share those links in the follow-up email.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I can send
Right.
it. So.